Welcome back. So at this point, we have talked about Linux as if it were a single operating system. But in actuality, Linux has many different distributions that are available. We talked previously about GNU and open source, which really is what leads us to the different Linux distributions that are available today. A lot of new users to Linux tend to get confused by what a distribution actually is. Don't let it confuse you. We're going to talk about what makes a Linux operating system an operating system, and then the different distributions that are available today. Each of these distributions have a Linux kernel, along with a set of their own utilities and configurations. With those two things conjoined, you have a Linux distribution that can absolutely differ from each other, and even as much as, say, between OS X's with Windows. So what is a distribution? One way that was taught to me about thinking of Linux distributions is to think of distributions much like you do ice cream. Ice cream has many different flavors, but at ice cream's most basic formula, it is still the same. For example, ice cream is made of eggs, milk, some sugar, and some cream. There are many different companies that make and sell ice cream, but each customize their own ice creams by adding things like nuts, cookies, and candies. By adding these ingredients, and in its simplest form, they have created their own flavors. Linux distributions are very much the same thing, and that they all have a kernel, much like ice cream all has base ingredients. So, similar to companies adding their own ingredients on top of these base ingredients, creating their own flavors, so does Linux distributions, by adding their own specialized system tools, utilities, and even applications to enhance the Linux operating system. At the end of the day, many different software vendors and organizations have taken the base code that is freely available and created their very own flavor of Linux known as a Linux distribution. Let's talk about what makes a full-blown Linux operating system. Firstly, you have a Linux kernel. A Linux kernel is at the core of every Linux operating system. Linux kernels are constantly being developed, matured, and being made better. Between distribution to distribution, there are usually changes in the Linux kernel specific for that distribution that often are just patches and updates and/or tweaks, bug fixes, and even feature additions. You have core Unix tools. Usually, the GNU toolset, perhaps an X Windows system, and other utilities that are for managing disks or other things critical for making the Linux system even functional. You have supplemental software. This is usually additional software such as major server applications, desktop environments, productivity tools, and even more. These all ship with almost all Linux distributions. Startup scripts. Each of these personalities, if you will, come out of each distribution by the way in which it is managed in the startup process. Linux uses scripts and utilities to launch lots of programs which link the computer to perhaps a network or even present a login prompt. Keep in mind that traditional startup scripts are being phased out. New versions of distributions are more startup services now rather than startup scripts. Startup scripts are being phased out within most major distributions. Installers. Another core feature in Linux distributions, which also sets distributions apart from each other, are the installers that are used for installing software and managing that software. So, what are just a few different Linux distributions? You may have heard of a couple of these. CentOS, Debian, Fedora, Gentoo Linux, OpenSUSE, which is the open source equivalent to SUSE, in which we'll talk about in just a moment, which is more of an enterprise version of Linux. Red Hat, which is another enterprise version of Linux, and Slackware, which happens to be one of the earliest actual distributions to come from a Linux kernel. And then finally, Ubuntu, which is actually one of the most popular and widely available distributions today. So, with all the different distributions that are available today, what might be right for our project? Some of the things that you might look at between the different distributions is to make sure that is the system going to be for a desktop or a server. Some different distributions are better for desktop, and some distributions might be better for servers. If it's production environment, a commercial distribution with support might be best for your needs. I mentioned a moment ago that there is SUSE and Red Hat, which are great examples of something that might come with a great support contract. The support contract comes in very needy if you're in an environment. If your system goes down, you typically, depending on your support contract time, or SLA, can get support very quickly, and most of the time even on the phone. Finally, does your system hardware even support the distribution of your choice that you're choosing? These are all very important things to look at and are all available on all the different websites when you're actually looking at particular different distributions. Let's go ahead and finish this lesson and jump into the next one.